Hello and welcome. My name is Hugo, and in this video I'm gonna show you how to create a window in C++ using the Win32 API. This is gonna be a pretty practical video, so I'm not gonna talk too much about how window creation works behind the scenes, and I'm more just gonna show you exactly what you have to do in order to open a window. This will be perfect if you're learning DirectX or something like that. I think it goes without saying, but this tutorial can only be followed if you are using Windows, because the Win32 API is specific to Windows. So let's get started. Before I start coding, I just want to mention that window creation comes in two parts: the creation and the events handling. The creation is pretty self-explanatory, because it's simply just opening a window with the desired properties. But events is a bit more complicated, and I will come back to that a bit later when we actually are at that stage in the code. For now though, I think it's time to start coding. I've created a new project in Visual Studio 2019, and I'm gonna start by adding a file called program.cpp. Then I'm also gonna add a new class, and I will call that window. So that will represent the window that we're going to open. I will start by adding a public section, and I'm going to add a default constructor. Then I don't really think it makes sense to be able to copy these windows, and that may cause some problems. So I'm actually going to delete the copy constructor and also delete the equals operator. You don't really have to do this, but I think it's a good practice if you don't want the user to be able to copy windows. And lastly, I'm gonna add a destructor for the window as well. Next, I'm gonna go down a bit and add a new function or a method, and that will return a bool and be named process messages. And you will see in a bit why I added that method. So now I'm just gonna create the definition for all of these, and we can just go into the CPP file to see that it has worked. As I mentioned earlier, window creation comes in two parts, both the creation and the handling of events. And events are handled using something called messages. The messages are sent when an event occurs, and we can get the events by using two different methods. There's the getMessage function and the peekMessage function. These have the same purpose, but the difference is that the getMessage function waits until a message is sent, if there are none, and the peekMessage just continues if no messages were found. And that means that we can do rendering and stuff in between without having to wait for the messages. So peekMessage is actually the one that we're gonna use. When we have the message, we have to send it to something called the window procedure, and that's done using a function called dispatchMessage. The window procedure is a function that we define ourselves, and that basically handles the message. So we get information about key presses, if we have clicked the close button, and everything like that. Everything comes in form of a message, and we can handle that in the window procedure. So let's implement that. So we have the methods that we defined before, and we're gonna go back into the header file, and we're gonna start by including the Windows header, because that's required when using Win32. Then I'm gonna create a private section, and I'm gonna create two member variables. The first one will be an H instance, and the second one will be an H window. These are both required when creating windows, but you don't really need to know exactly what they mean. The H window is connected to the actual window instance, and the H instance is more connected to the application. But you don't have to know much more than that. We're gonna go back into the CPP file, and I'm gonna initialize the H instance to a function called getModuleHandle. And this takes in a null pointer. As you can see, this is actually a macro that extends to the same word with a W at the end, and that just stands for wide character, but you don't really have to know exactly what that means, so don't worry about why that is. We're now going to create a wide char pointer called class name, and I will set that to Hugo's window class, but this can be anything. You can see the L at the start, and that defines that it is a wide string, as I mentioned before. And the type, instead of being a char pointer, is actually a wchar_t pointer. So that's also for wide character string. Then we're going to create a window class, and I will name that WND class. And we're going to initialize it to nothing. And we need to set a few parameters here. So first we have the class name, and that's the string that we defined before. Next, we have the H instance, and that's the one that we just got. So we'll initialize that to M instance. Then we have an H icon, and we can load an icon that we want using a macro called load icon, and that takes in null and IDI underscore win logo. So the win logo obviously is not the only option. You can use any type of icon, but I'm gonna use this as a test. Then we can do the same thing for cursor. That also takes in null as the first argument. And then I'm gonna say IDC underscore arrow. So that means that the mouse will be an arrow. And just like with the icons, you can set that to any type of cursor. The last thing that we need to define is something called the window procedure. And that's the one that I mentioned before, but we haven't implemented that, so we're gonna fix that later. We can just set it to null pointer for now. Next, we're gonna register the window class, and that just takes in a pointer to the window class object. You can see that all of these are actually macros, but once again, you don't have to think too much about it. They will all expand to the same thing with a W at the end. Next, I'm gonna define a D word called style, and I'm gonna set that to W as caption. And then with the bitwise OR operator, I'm gonna combine that with minimize box and sysmenu. Caption just makes the window have a title bar. Then the minimize box creates a minimize box in the corner, and sysmenu displays the minimize box and close button and stuff like that. If you want to see all possible styles, then you can check the description, because I will leave a link to the documentation. Then we're going to create a Rect, and this will be the dimensions of the window. The left and the top will be where on the screen that the window appears. So you can set that to whatever you want. I'm going to set it to 250. And then we're gonna define the right side to the left side plus a width. So I'm defining an integer called width and height, and I'm setting these to some values. You can obviously choose size. And then the bottom is going to be the top plus the height. But this right now will actually create a window where the outer border is of this size. And especially for games and stuff, you want the inner, the actual canvas to be the right size. So we can use a function called adjust window rect, and that takes in the pointed to the rect, then a style, and if we're using menus, which we will say false. And this just corrects the rectangle so that we're actually using the width and the height as the canvas size and not the outer border. And that makes a lot more sense. Then we're gonna initialize the h-window object. And we're gonna do that with a function called createWindowEx. The first argument will be 0. The next one will be the class name. The third will be the title of the window, so that will appear in the corner. Next will be the style that we defined up there. And it's important to make sure that the style is matching on all occurrences. And that's why I defined it as a variable up there. Next, it's gonna be the left of the window, so also called the x offset. Then the top. And then it's the width and the height. And you may think that you can just set these to the width and the height. But remember that we actually want to use the adjusted width and height. So we actually have to say rect.right minus rect.left for the width. And then do the same thing for the bottom and top. And this will make sure, once again, that the canvas area is of the right size. The next one will be null, and null once again. This can be used if you want to use menus, but we're not going to be using that. Second to last one will be the h instance, and the last one will be null once again. And these should be all the settings. And the last thing that we have to do is to actually show the window. And that's used by the function, that's done using the function show window, and that takes in the window and sw show. So this should be everything for creating the window. The only thing we have to add is that we have to actually unregister the class after we're done using it. You can store this class name somewhere, but I'm just gonna copy it because we need the class name when we're deleting the class as well. So unregister class will take in the class name and the h instance. Now we're gonna go back into the header file, and we're gonna fix this with the window procedure. So first we're gonna define the window procedure, and that returns an L result. It's also a callback, which you don't need to know exactly what that means. And I'm gonna name it window proc. That takes in a h window, a uint called for the message, a w param, and an l param. And these are always the parameters. So lResult is just the return type. Callback, you don't really need to know what that means. This is the only place where we're going to use it. WindowProc is the name. HWindow is what window it's coming from, the message. The next one is the actual message. WParam gives information about the message, and so does the LParam. So that's all of the parameters. And we're going to create a definition for that. I'm just going to move this up a bit because I want it to be at the top. Next, we're going to add back the callback because I think we should have that in the definition as well. And in here, I'm going to create a switch statement, and we're going to switch on the message. And then I'm going to say case WM underscore close. And that's a message that's sent if we press the close button. So if the close button is pressed, we're going to destroy the window. And that's done using the function destroy window that takes in the window that we want to destroy. And that's obviously the window that we clicked close on. And I'm going to add one more message, and that is WM destroy. And this is sent when a window is destroyed. So when our window is destroyed, we actually want to quit the application. So I'm going to say post quit message, and that will take in 0. And after that, we can also return. Then at the end, we're actually going to do one more thing, and that's return the default Windows procedure. And that just handles stuff that we haven't defined here. And that window procedure takes in the exact same parameters. So we can just pass them one by one. So now for the actual use of this window procedure, we have to set the window procedure to that window proc. So this is a function pointer. And now we're on to the last method. So in the process messages, we're first going to create a message object, and we're going to initialize that to nothing. And then while peak message, which is the function I talked about earlier, and that takes in the message, a pointer to that. The next one is null pointer. The two next parameters will always be 0. And the last one will be PM underscore remove. So peak message returns true as long as there are more messages in the queue. And the message is where we want to store the returned message. And PM remove just means that we want to remove the message from the queue after we have gotten it. In here, we're going to do mainly two things. That's translate message and dispatch message. And as you remember, dispatch message was the one that calls the window procedure. And translate message, you don't really need to know what that means, but it's like translating key presses into characters and stuff like that. That's not too important to know exactly how that works. We can also say return true. And this is because I want the window procedure to return true as long as we want the program to continue running. But if the message that we got is actually equal to WM underscore quit, then it means that we want to exit the application and we can return false. So WM quit is actually sent when we said post quit message up here. So when we say post quit message, then we want the application to stop running, so we return false. And otherwise true. So now we're going to go into the program.cpp file, and I'm first going to include IO stream, and that's just because I want to be able to write to the console. And then I'm going to include window.h, which is the header that we created. Then I'm going to create a main method, and I'm first going to just log to the console creating window. And under here we're actually going to create the window, so we're going to say window pointer p window equals a new window, and that doesn't take any parameters. Then I'm going to say bool running equals to true, and this variable will be storing if we want to continue running. And while running, so while we want to continue, this is where we're gonna render. So we want to render every frame. Then we're gonna say delete window, just to clean up. And inside this sort of game loop is a common word for it. We want to say that if window.process messages, and if that's not true, which means that we don't want to continue running, we need to say running equals to false. And I can also print out closing window. And as I said, we also want to say running equals false, because we want to exit the application. Now, obviously, we're not going to implement any rendering, and because this will run at a very high speed, I'm actually going to say sleep for 10, just so we don't stress the computer too much. And now I think we're actually ready to build this program, and that has worked successfully, and we can run it. Now the console and the window actually opened on my second monitor, but you can see that it has worked perfectly. So that should be everything for this video. As you can see, we can also close the program and that will terminate. So everything is working as expected. So I just want to say thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful, and if it was, please consider liking the video. And I will see you next time. Thank you. Bye.